Alright, hi everyone. I wanted to talk to you today about Clairaudience and Clairaudient Empathy, which is like a hybrid Clairaudience. I can only tell you about my experience. I think looking back in retrospect, realized that I was clairaudient probably in around first or second grade. I can say I'm English as a second language. I kind of learned English and Spanish together at the same time. You know, in kindergarten I started learning English, but I'd heard a little bit more Spanish at home and some English. My siblings are 7 years older than me. So developmentally, I had like just an understanding problem as far as like language, and because of the 7-year age difference. So that forced me to have to rely on body language a lot. And in first or second grade, when I started reading, I think initially when I was learning both English and Spanish, I would read and like define a word, you know, in English or Spanish, and then kind of like look it up and realize what it meant and move on. And so like at the end of the story, I wouldn't necessarily put the story together in my head because I was just like translating word for word. And I remember that they put us in reading groups. I think it was like first or second grade. And the reading group they put me in was called Birds Fly and Bears Don't. And I remember going home and telling my mom, like, oh my gosh, like, they think I'm stupid at school. Like, they think I don't know that birds fly and bears don't. Like I know I read slow, but like I understand the words, you know. I know that birds fly and bears don't. Like, I'm not a tool pendeja, you know. But there was some significance to the stuff happening there. In learning two languages, I kind of pronounce things really differently because of the way they sounded. And if you're clairaudient, there's a good chance that like your ears are shaped a little differently because there's no earbud that like fits in my ears. I've tried every one on the planet. I prefer an over the ear earbud. But like a lot of my O's would sound like E's when I was younger, and sometimes even when I'm really tired now. Shout out to Hey Harold for noticing that. But I used to say like fur and mur a lot instead of for and more. And I think a lot of people will say that I talk really quietly, especially when I teach, and I've always taught places where there's like an airport nearby, or I've always been able to speak just loud enough for the person that I'm teaching to hear me, but not for like people next to us to hear me. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but in 4th grade we had like an elocutionist, I guess is what you would call her, come to our elementary school, and she would like have us enunciate and pronounce words like properly. So instead of saying like was and because, she would tell us to say like was and because. And when I started to speak that way, it kind of opened up my ability to hear like differently. I don't know, just cleared my ear canals or whatever the terminology is for that. It allowed me to hear a little bit differently. If you're clairaudient, if you talk a lot or you listen to a lot of music, you can usually mimic or impersonate voices and sounds pretty well. I used to, I don't anymore. I had a lot of trouble in school. Typically you're dyslexic if you have any kind of auditory clairvoyance. And I would get a lot of feedback and tones and bell sounds and ringing that I just kind of really never paid attention to very much. And it got more and more prevalent when I left to college. I'd hear it definitely out on the golf course. It was really quiet out there. The hybrid gift that I developed over the years there's actually like a name for it. I guess other people have gone through it. I'm a Clairaudient Empath, so I was already an empath. And what that means is your feelings process as like auditory sensory tones. So like they translate as auditory sounds or ringing or lack of sound. And especially when it comes to emotional like energy or projection. So like I almost hear it as words when it comes to like lies, hate, like you emit such a strong energy, the tone is so strong that I can almost hear the hate being projected at me, which is kind of weird, but it's legit. In college, I had a lot of trouble passing classes, and being that I was dyslexic and was going through like my first spiritual awakening and trying to balance playing golf for the university and make grades and just studying a lot. I had trouble passing classes, but I was studying constantly. I was always in the student athlete center, and finally I had a teacher of mine that had an office right by the student athlete like study center where you had to go if you were like on academic probation, which was pretty much my whole college career. And I had him for some humanities class, I can't remember now, but I was not doing well in his class. I was getting like C's and D's, and he saw me in there all the time. And he finally asked me like what sport I played. I don't know, I played golf. He said golfers are typically pretty smart, you're in there all the time. Like come into my office during my office hours and we'll take a look at your tests or whatever. I went in there and he pulled out my test and asked me questions about it, and asked me one of the questions on there, and I didn't even need the multiple choice answers. I just answered it right off, and he's like, well, that's not what you answered on the test. And I was like, well, I don't think that's what I felt like I read. And so he suggested that I read the questions out loud, and I could go during his office hours, and that helped quite a bit. And then I discovered that if I'm going to read like literature and stuff like that, that it helps if I read in character voices, especially if I want to determine how they felt about something in the story, like character development. So that pretty much changed my life in terms of studying and being able to understand, reading comprehension, stuff like that. Let's talk about if you have an auditory sensory gift, what that can be like. I'll talk about my experience. So some people get ringing or tones or feedback. I kind of get a little bit of everything. So probably the coolest thing is when I'm in danger, when there's something that's going to happen, something imminent, something that's just like feels really bad, an icky person, I don't know, always just a situation where things are going to go bad. I go deaf in both ears. I can't hear anything, not the sounds around me, not the people. It usually happens probably a second before I need to get moving or should be moving. So that's probably your biggest warning sign if you're kind of a clairaudient person. The left ear for me is one where I get tones, very distinct tones. Sometimes I get like an isolated tone from one ear to another, or just deafness in one ear. I'll get feedback and distortion, and I'll explain. So my left ear, I get a very specific short tone for intuition. So if my intuition's on or off, I'll get a high or low tone. It lets me know to kind of pay attention to what I'm hearing or what I'm listening to. Emotional awareness creates a tone, and it'll usually leave like a very short tone if the emotion that I'm seeing in a person matches like their tone of voice, their attitude, their posturing, baseline body language. I'm gonna move around a little bit, it's getting hard to think. If you're someone that has like a psychic ability as far as like a seer or insight type of stuff like that, what you will hear is like pulses, sort of. And what that pulse for me is a word that I've kind of just coined myself is like an intro actuality. So when I get those tones as far as like prediction or psychic ability, as far what that means for me is like there's a pattern existing there, there's synchronicities, there's congruencies happening there with behaviors in people or patterns or situations or social environments where it allows me to predict like what's going to happen, just kind of based on like the way my brain fires and putting like the the actuality of the situation and, you know, the likeliness of what's going to happen and like personalities of the people around me. Like it just kind of, it helps with that. Gossip and backtalk. Gossip and backtalk comes through as like a distorted buzzing. And by backtalk, I mean like a incongruency. Like someone will say, oh, you know, I love hiking or this and that, and then, you know, someone else says something, oh, like hiking can get boring or whatever, and they'll be like, oh yeah, you know, I don't hike that much because this, that, or whatever. So, you know, like a buzzing sound will go off to let me know, like, hey, something's up with that person. If someone is telling a malicious lie, or they feel pure hate, rage, like envy, greed, typically pedos or like psychopaths, sociopaths, hardcore like poser energy. I hear like a kazoo feedback very distinctly, and that's why it sounds kind of like you can actually hear it in a voice sound. So that's what goes on in the left ear for me. On the right ear, this is like a ringing or a bell or a chime or a tuning fork. And the right ear for me is very much confirmation. When I hear something that sounds correct, when I'm on the right track for something. Bells are also guidance when I'm faced with a choice or a certain direction that I need to move in. It's encouragement, support, you know, bell ringing sounds, dinging tones. Also for clarity, you know, it'll be a very short bell. For guidance, the bell will get louder and more like ringing, prolonged, like the pedals on a piano. As I'm going in the right direction or towards the right guided area, and as I move away from that, it'll actually fade. And then for opportunities, I will usually get bell sounds, dinging tones, or chimes. Yeah, so that's kind of what goes on there in the right ear. It's not tinnitus, it's nothing constant, there's no pain to it, it's very distinct. I very rarely get it when I'm by myself and I isolate. Yeah, so if you're clairaudient and you have any of that stuff going on, maybe look into it. Definitely meditate. I would also say spend some time wearing earplugs around people. That way you can learn their body language. I think for me, because I grew up with such a drastic age difference between my siblings, I got really good with body language because I didn't understand the words in either language, like the definitions of them, you know. So I really had to rely on what I was seeing. And I think for clairaudient people, after a while, if you put the earplugs in and learn not to rely on those tones for a while, and then you take them out, you'll be really, really sharp at being able to pick them up. And then definitely take notes and journal as to what you're kind of noticing as far as your day and the sounds and things that happen. With music, it'll be very distinct. You'll hear it. Sometimes you don't even know the songs. You'll hear lyrics or distinct beats and patterns. I hear beats and patterns long before I get lyrics. And I'm not really good at picking up necessarily, like, you know, I'm not the type of person that recognizes music off of the first beat necessarily with all songs, maybe some favorites. And then I'll get some lyrics and I just punch them into Google. I recently just started to get books, and it was literally like a couple lines out of the book. And same thing with the movie, just flashes of movie scenes and stuff as I'm channeling messages. So I'm kind of looking into that. So that's what I can tell you as far as clairaudience. I hope that helps people out there, and good luck. Have fun with it. Make the world a better place. Love y'all. Take care.